From the Lean Enterprise Institute in Boston, this is the WLEI Podcast, where we share stories of people making the world better through lean thinking and practice. For more information about LEI, including how we can help you apply lean thinking, please visit lean.org.
Welcome to the WLEI Podcast. Today I'm turning things over to LEI President Josh Howell and Senior Coach Mark Reich. They'll discuss LEI's upcoming book written by Mark titled Managing on Purpose. The book is a practical guide to Hoshin Kanri, or strategy deployment, and how organizations can use Hoshin Kanri to align strategy with execution, build leadership capabilities, and drive meaningful results. The book launches at the Lean Summit in Atlanta, which is starting March 5th, where attendees will receive a free copy, and it will be available for general sale starting March 10th on lean.org. Mark and Josh discuss key aspects of the book, particularly how Hoshin Kanri isn't just about planning, but about developing leaders at all levels. I'll now turn it over to Mark and Josh.
All right. Welcome, Mark, to the WLEI Podcast. Thanks for agreeing to have this conversation with me.
Great to be here.
And the occasion for this conversation, this is one of several things that we've been doing in recent weeks and that we have plans to do in the upcoming weeks, coinciding with the launch of the book that you've written, Managing on Purpose. So first, I guess, congratulations on finishing the book and getting it published.
Well, thank you very much.
I know it's been a tremendous amount of effort on your part. How long would you say it took you to write this book?
It's a little more than a year, probably, but it was actually about 30 years.
So I was gonna say
of experience, kind of building up. It's just kind of poured forth, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I know you've been teaching a class for LEI on Hoshin Kanri for many years, and I think you leveraged that experience quite extensively in what you put into the book. So yeah, I guess probably at least you've been with LEI for 13 years, at least 13 years. You've been at it working on it. But I know much of it is rooted in the experience that you have while working for Toyota. Anyway, well, congratulations. I know it's just been a tremendous effort on your part. It's quite an achievement to write a book. This is something that you and I have talked about for many years since we've known each other. And to have it now just, I guess, weeks away, really days away almost from the finish line is pretty exciting. So I mentioned we've been doing several things, of course, to bring awareness to this book, let people know that it's been written, that we're publishing it, when they can get it, all that kind of stuff. So a couple of weeks ago, you and I did a LinkedIn live stream that afforded you an opportunity to overview the book. We took some questions from people out in the community. And then in a couple of weeks, I guess, by the time this thing comes out, it'll be just the following week at LEI's Lean Summit. You're going to do a keynote talk, and you've got a panel with some executives that have been practicing Hoshin Kanri for a while. So we'll get to do some things there to let people know about the book and whatnot. But for this podcast conversation, I guess I was hoping that we could focus on kind of one specific aspect of Hoshin Kanri in particular. And one that I think you and I agree about can be overlooked by some in their experience with Hoshin Kanri, and that is leadership development. So the ways that Hoshin Kanri can be used for that, really at all levels of the organization. So I guess just to set kind of a focus for our conversation today. So we mentioned this already, but I guess you said 30 years, let's say, in writing the book. I guess that would be comprised of the 20 plus years that you worked for Toyota, the 10 plus years, I guess 13 specifically, that you've worked with LEI and supporting many people with Lean generally and Hoshin Kanri specifically, and even personally. I mean, I've learned more or less everything I know about Hoshin Kanri from working with you, both in terms of our own use of Hoshin Kanri at the Lean Enterprise Institute, and then the opportunity to collaborate with you in supporting some of LEI's co-learning partner organizations and others out in the field, trying to make good use of Hoshin Kanri. So thank you for all of that learning and mentorship that you've given to me. It certainly helped in my leadership development. But I guess maybe a good place to start. Well, we've mentioned it already, but your 30+ year career, much of that at Toyota, but also 13 years at LEI. So let's maybe focus in on your experience, your background with Toyota, and if you could, just give us an overview of the 23 years you spent there, from when you were hired until when you left the organization, just as background for our conversation today.
Sure, Josh. Well, just to kind of give you an overview, I in the middle of the 1980s, I left. I got out of college in the early 80s, and I ended up in Japan in the mid 80s studying. I was studying Japanese, and sometimes people say you make your opportunities and you fall into opportunities. It was kind of a combination of that, but I found a position was potentially available after I got out of school in Japan to join Toyota, and I interviewed and I entered. And my first job in Toyota, I worked for what was called the Overseas Planning Division. And that group had responsibility for defining the content in terms of specifications, pricing, and supply for all overseas models that came from Toyota. And we worked closely with on one side with the chief engineers to determine what the content of those models would be. And on the other side, we worked with our overseas distributorships to kind of get alignment and agreement because, for example, Camry might be sold in 35 markets, and you can't make 35 unique versions of that. So you have to have some level of commonality. So I spent 6 years there. I transferred from that organization back to the United States to work at a group called the Toyota Supplier Support Center. That was their name at the time. They've since changed their name. I was actually there when we kind of initiated that change to the Toyota Production Systems Support Center. They're still called TSSC. But that group was set up. I joined that group in 94. They were set up 2 years before in 1992 to help Toyota suppliers and actually any company that was interested in implementing the Toyota production system. And at that time, in the beginning, it was mostly manufacturing. They helped with supporting shop floor hands-on improvement to help transform organizations that way.
What was your role with TSSC? You're like a coach?
I was initially a coach. I spent several years as a coach. I ended up moving into management, and I supported our overall relationship with suppliers at the time. I was there through 2000, end of 2000, and I got an opportunity. An opportunity came up within our corporate headquarters to move to our corporate strategy group and to work on a couple initiatives. One was an initiative called Advancing the Toyota Way, which was about further strengthening Hoshin Kanri as a methodology in the organization. And I was also consequently given responsibility to oversee the Hoshin Kanri process for all of Toyota North America, working, of course, with other executives. And that's just a note. I mean, that's Toyota's primary strategic planning methodology is Hoshin Kanri. I worked there for about 7 years, and then I transferred back to TSSC as the general manager and led that organization for my final 3 years in Toyota before I left.
Okay.
It was in 2011.
Well, so given our topic here, Hoshin Kanri, leadership development, clearly the role you had, those 7 or so years that you spent with corporate strategy, would be kind of most relevant. I mean, your job day in and day out had to do with Hoshin Kanri. And you mentioned 2 primary, I guess, activities you were involved in there, responsibilities you had. One was the work that you did on this Advancing the Toyota Way initiative, and then as the process owner in North America for Hoshin Kanri. But you talked about the objective was to strengthen the use of Hoshin Kanri here in North America. So Perhaps you could give us some background or share the context. So why was it important, or why was it that Toyota in North America was working on strengthening its management system with regard to Hoshin Kanri? What was kind of going on for the business at that time?
Well, Toyota globally, like going into the 90s, early 2000s, was growing significantly. They were growing so they were moving to a great extent from a company that manufactured and designed vehicles in Japan and exported them to the world, to one that was moving its manufacturing and design base to a great extent into kind of regional areas. One of those most important regions was North America. So particularly I mentioned to you at the end of 2000, I joined corporate strategy, but really it started, I would say, like the decade from like 1998 to 2008, when of course, 2008 was the global financial crisis, but particularly that decade, Toyota grew significantly. And when I say grew, I mean, we not only grew in sales, we grew in sales because we added new products like Lexus, but we grew our manufacturing base significantly. And when I say significantly, we kind of doubled the number of plants we had and the number of people across North America. And in conjunction with that, part of that, in the course of doing that, we had gotten a lot of support from Japan. But Japan was Japan had to manage the world, not just North America. And they were getting very busy particularly in China. China was growing even faster, and they were newer than we were as a manufacturing base. So they asked us to take on some leadership role ourselves, and to take more ownership for kind of building up our kind of leadership ranks. And that initially Toyota had been established in North America and was managed fully from Japan. So we established a headquarters in 1986 to kind of manage all that, but there were still legacy systems that existed where plants were reporting back to Japan. So part of it, to your question about how Hoshin Kanri could help, is it kind of, with the support of headquarters, we brought together the plants to gain alignment on what are the initiatives that the plant should do, and what should we focus on across North America. And that was the name of that initiative. We call it self-reliance.
So this self-reliance initiative. So the context is companies growing significantly. You said 2x growth around this time frame. So the number of plants, just like the scope of what the company needed to manage, which up until then had been done entirely from Japan, was just getting huge, obviously. And so in order to kind of effectively sustain that form of management here in North America, where I guess North American growth would have been extremely explosive around that time. If the company's growing at 2x, it wasn't that many years before, 1983, I think, when Toyota first exported production to the U.S. in Fremont, California, the very famous story that people know about, joint venture with General Motors. So just explosive growth here in North America. And so the self-reliance initiative, I guess this is sort of the term that was given, or the challenge that was given from management in Japan to North American leadership to become capable of managing that growth, more and more independent, I guess, from leadership and management in Japan. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, I think it was referred to as self-reliance because, just to kind of explain concretely, up until that time, a fair amount of support had been provided from Japan. As an example, if we were going to launch a new Camry, and Camrys built in our Kentucky plants. In Toyota, there is a mother plant called the Tsutsumi plant that's in near Toyota City. And that plant also makes Camrys for North America. So what would typically happen in that scenario is the mother plant, the plant in Japan, would launch the vehicle first, kind of work out a lot of the bugs that might happen at the very beginning of a production launch, and then fly a bunch of people to North America to make sure that the launch in North America went smooth. But the reality was Toyota, because of the transfer of design and many other functions to North America, more and more vehicles were being produced and developed in North America, specifically for the North American market. So that model couldn't work going forward. We had to have the ability to effectively launch our own vehicles. And and the fact of the matter was, we had at that time several plants in North America, multiple plants that existed, more were being built. But there was an opportunity that we were not fully utilizing to better collaborate among those facilities and learn from each other. And so that was the focus of the self-reliance.
Okay. And it sounds like Hoshin Kanri, then, that management system based on Hoshin Kanri was key to North American leadership responding to the challenge from Japan to become increasingly self-reliant. So could you talk a little bit about kind of how that worked? What role did Hoshin Kanri play in beginning to build this self-reliance inside Toyota North America?
Sure. Maybe take a step back for a moment, and even before we get into Hoshin Kanri, in 2003, part of what our group decided to do was to pull together all of the plant managers, all the leaders from all the plants. They were called plant presidents.
Okay.
And all of our functional leaders, and for over a couple of days, we defined a vision for North America, particularly for North American manufacturing. And this is 2003. So we defined a vision for 2010. And that vision was to be the most admired automaker in North America. And terminology is important. I mean, we were, up until that time, often known as an auto importer, not an automaker.
Right.
And so it was critical for us, particularly in being, as part of production, that the communities we built plants in and our customers saw us as really someone who was contributing to North America. And so we established that vision. Out of that vision came kind of four Hoshin objectives.
Okay.
And they related to customer satisfaction, supplier improvement, cost reduction, and people development. And the way Hoshin helped us is we assigned plant leaders and corporate headquarters leaders as teams to focus on each of those initiatives. And that was different because up until that time, if you were the head of a plant, like the plant in Kentucky, your primary responsibility is to ensure that plant is run effectively, makes good quality vehicles on time as needed with good cost.
Well, it sounds like any maybe sort of collaboration outside the plant that would have happened at that time would have happened between that plant and its quote unquote mother plant in Japan.
Yes, that's the primary way things got.
It wasn't that there wasn't some external collaboration, but it wasn't contained within the North American business. Exactly.
Right. So we asked the leader of that plant, who had a big job already, but actually to take on an initiative like people development. And in fact, the Kentucky plant manager at the time took on people development, working with the HR vice president at headquarters to determine what core issues should we tackle relative to developing the capability of our people, knowing we're growing and we've got a lot of new people coming into the organization. And that, they put together, those two people put together a strategy on how to address those issues. And it turns out, a strategy like that involves a lot of different functions in the organization. I mean, we're talking about development of people. Well, primarily that might be plant related people, but it's also going to be other like support functions. So collaborating and getting alignment across the organization was critical. It also ended up, that there's not something that could be accomplished merely at top leadership. We had to involve people in middle management, and in fact, there were hundreds of people kind of involved that support each one of these initiatives across the organization. It also kind of built the capability of leadership to kind of think beyond, like a plant leader, to think beyond their current plant and the capabilities of that current plant, and think about what are the capabilities required across the entire organization.
Well, so maybe even more fundamentally, I guess, what was it maybe within this, I don't know, advancing the Toyota Way initiative, perhaps, or other related work to what was being developed now through Hoshin Kanri? You just talked about one of the challenges that leaders were confronting was having to think kind of beyond their immediate scope of responsibility. But I guess even more fundamentally, what were some ways that those leaders, the leaders, let's say that the plant leader and the HR leader that would have been responsible for kind of capability development within North America, what experiences would they have had even previously in their own development that would have prepared them to lead such an important initiative? I guess I'm thinking specifically around, their learning around, I don't know, like problem solving fundamentals, or just like fundamentals in building capability in others. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that and sort of its relationship to this Hoshin Kanri based initiative.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's easy to define. I shouldn't say it's easy, but it was generally easier to define some core objectives to focus on. I think executing on them can be a challenge if the leader doesn't have effective capability to understand the problems that exist in the like deeper into the organization. So one of the critical things that these, you asked me what kind of capabilities they had. I think to a certain extent, though it wasn't perfect. I mean, if you grew up in Toyota, and all these plant leaders did, and you spent a decade, 2 decades with the organization, you kind of went through the process of learning how to do problem solving. We used, frontline problem solving, whether on the shop floor, or A3 problem solving. A3 was a primary mechanism we used to help the organization solve problems. And most of the leaders that had, that were positioned to lead these objectives had kind of experienced that type of work. So one of the first things that all the leaders did was kind of grasp the situation. I mentioned to you the people development one. I mean, a supplier improvement objective is another really interesting one that really spans at the time a huge number of functions within Toyota, like purchasing, logistics, quality, production, our TPS group, even HR in terms of how you interact with the suppliers. And the leaders of that initiative needed to go out and find out, like, okay, what's like in critical suppliers, what really is happening. So go and see what's happening in suppliers, understand the issues that are happening related to logistics by working with our logistics team and engaging people there. So there was a fair amount of effort just put around like understanding what are the current problems that exist and how to tackle it. That ended up kind of resulting in what we call strategy A3, which defined, I think, for the leadership team and for the organization, like what is in the supplier capability issue, for example, what are the current issues related to suppliers? Who are the top suppliers that are at risk relative to quality or delivery to Toyota? And that helped clarify for the organization, like what are who needed to be involved going forward, and also what actions need to be taken.
Okay, so for these, so from the vision North American leadership defines these 4 objectives. You describe the process using fundamental problem-solving approach to kind of grasping the current state at the Gemba with regard to these high-level challenges, and how that then would that what they discovered through that process would be used for developing a strategy 3. But here we're talking about, at least what I'm thinking about, is at the top of sort of the North American organization. But of course, you also mentioned that there were hundreds of kind of middle managers involved in this work and supporting this work and making their own contributions. So could you talk a little bit about then how that work, kind of that direction, those high level objectives and those strategy 3s sort of filtered down through the organization? What did middle managers do in response to this direction and in preparation for the execution work that was to follow?
Sure. So let me use the supplier improvement objective as an example. So an A3 was put together on where the organization should focus, as I mentioned earlier, relative to current supplier quality issues, supplier selection related issues. And that was communicated with various functions in the organization. First, it was communicated laterally with all the leaders across the functions in manufacturing in North America. But that also was communicated to like the next level management, and specific issues were addressed in the Hoshin at the corporate level, as well as the strategy A3, that had to be solved by individual functions in the organization. Okay. And I'll just give you a couple examples. So I mentioned to you earlier that there were issues potentially related to quality and supplier quality, and what suppliers were struggling with quality or not struggling with quality, and where they needed help. Well, that was an area that both our purchasing group, who selected suppliers, and what was the criteria and how well did they know? Were they selecting a really good supplier? That's one function that had to look at how they went through supplier selection. Right. But also our quality group, which had functions within quality for both our internal quality, but also supplier quality. And so a whole new function was defined for supplier quality to ensure that, particularly before the launch of a product, that the supplier was really ready, and to dedicate a lot of resources to ensure that was done better. I mentioned in TSSC, and our whole TPS group, we've had both an internal and external group. The whole TPS group looked at how to better improve capability of TPS in our suppliers, the Toyota production system, so that our suppliers would be able to not only for this launch, like launch the parts that they needed to supply to a new product effectively, but ongoing. It strengthened the fundamental capabilities of the production system and the management system in our supplier group.
Okay. So you've now described several kind of aspects of this.
Sorry, Josh, sorry to interrupt you, but maybe I should say that, one other thing I should conclude that conversation with, just for the audience, is that, these functions took on because of what was requested around supplier improvement. These functions took some initiative upon themselves to improve, but there was a mechanism for that. And that was what we call our divisional or departmental Hoshin.
Okay.
In there, they created a Hoshin, purchasing created a Hoshin for purchasing. And within the content of that Hoshin included these types of items like suppliers, improving the supplier selection criteria. In our TPS group, we created, in TSSC, we created a Hoshin for how we go to ensure that we are improving and further developing key suppliers in their TPS capabilities.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt you there.
That's okay. That's okay. I mean, you're helping us understand this management system that was emerging at that time, and various kind of mechanisms within that. I'd also like to ask a little bit about, so, you were, as all this is happening, you're in the corporate strategy group. You've talked a little bit about some of what was happening to quote unquote advance the Toyota way. But you also mentioned that for, I think, the majority of the time that you were in the corporate strategy group, you were the process owner for Hoshin Kanri North America. And so could you help us understand about that role too? I guess there's probably some aspects of that were about building out this management system. And then there was some role responsibilities that you had to facilitate, like the process and the work that all these leaders at different levels and across these different plants and departments were having to do. So you could tell us about that process owner role.
Yeah, I guess there's a certain nature of those type of roles in Toyota where you're I would say that's true in corporate strategy. It was true in the TSSC, where they're also kind of a support group for the organization. It could well be true it was true in organizations like HR or IS. But the responsibility was kind of twofold. And we had, meaning a lot of what I was just talking about was actually strategic thinking.
Right.
How do we go about defining what our vision should be? Based on that vision, how do we go about trying to achieve it? And what strategically do we need to do as an organization to engage people up and down the organization and across the organization, horizontally too, to ensure that we accomplish specific objectives and targets for the organization to ensure its success in North America as we were growing. That's a strategic component. And I think, it would be completely wrong of me to say that I led all that. I mean, as the head and a process owner of Hoshin Kanri, a great part of my job was meeting with the CEO, meeting with leadership in corporate strategy, meeting with leadership from other functions to kind of build alignment on this direction. And so that what I'm describing and what I've been describing the last couple of questions is the strategic planning process.
Right.
The design of that process was my job, making that process clear design and effective. So it's good quality Hoshin, so to speak. But at the same time, another huge component of my job was the whole support side function of my work, which means that Hoshin is owned by the leadership team. It's not owned by me. So part of my role was ensuring that I design a good process that pulls together people and helps them establish their strategic direction, their Hoshin plan, but also step in as they needed support. A lot of times, executives are busy. They need to communicate to one another. If that's not happening effectively, I need to raise that problem to the surface and help them with that. So that they can be more effective. So it's kind of just to kind of include, it's a strategic role, but it's also a support role.
Yeah. So at that time, as this system was effectively being built, I can understand there was a lot of design work to be done, kind of strategically design the system so that it would be effective as needed. And then you're also talking about this support responsibility that you had. At some point though, the system exists. There's, it no longer needs to be created. It exists. However, I'm assuming that support continues to be needed. So, you've not worked for Toyota for many years, so neither of us, including you, can really speak to exactly how things are working there today. But would you assume that a process owner of Hoshin Kanri in North America role remains in place today? Or would you say that role was the kind of role that was created just at the onset of building a management system like this? Does that make sense? Was that a role just to build the system, or was that a role that would kind of continue in perpetuity because that support for the leaders undertaking that work, that need would remain?
Well, I don't want to let me be clear here, Josh. I don't want to emphasize my role in all this. I mean, prior to my coming, I don't want to make it sound like prior to the time I came to corporate strategy into North America, no Hoshin existed.
Sure.
Toyota has used Hoshin in its organization since the 60s.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is the point in time when I got an opportunity in collaboration with a lot of people to manage that process was a fairly critical turning point in Toyota's history in North America as an automaker. And so, to the points I made earlier about, the way the organization had been set up previously with plants primarily reporting to Japan,
Right.
it was a pretty big shift in how we work together. And so Hoshin turned out to be a fairly effective tool and methodology to help bring the organization together and get it aligned. I would not say that, nothing existed and then Mark came in and performed miracles. Also, Hoshin Kanri was there. It was functioning. It needed to function stronger. And me, along with a lot of other key executives, I think made a big transition there. As far as, its existence now, I'm not there now. I do believe that Toyota, the thinking behind Hoshin Kanri and the methodology came and it was established originally for Toyota in Japan and back in the 60s. And Toyota's used that ever since. So I'm sure Toyota still uses that globally. I would assume, and again, I don't have a validation on all this, that probably a region, Toyota is now a very global company. Region by region, there are varying degrees of effectiveness on it, how well that's being used. It would be in any organization.
Well, I guess what interests me and what's kind of behind this question is more just the concept of a process owner.
Yes.
And I think about, the people who might be listening to this conversation, many of them are in, support functions, continuous improvement, lean, operational excellence functions, who might be involved in standing up or strengthening a critical process inside their company. And I think from our observations, what we see sometimes is that once that, let's call it a Hoshin Kanri based management system or a daily management system or a management process for solving problems using A3, that once that thing gets built or once that thing gets strengthened to meet the challenge of the day, so to speak, that the role that was set up to build that thing or to strengthen that thing kind of goes away. It's well, we've accomplished our task, right? We've strengthened this management system. Therefore, that role that was used to do that is no longer needed. Versus sort of basic thinking that says, well, sure, we strengthen this process or we develop the system, but it's going to need continued support and maintenance. Right, the business is going to evolve, the market's going to evolve. As we know, processes don't just naturally sustain themselves. They need to, be improved through rigorous PDCA over time. So I guess that's that. Not whether or not the company is still, how it's utilizing Hoshin Kanri generally, but I guess just that role of process owner is a role that I have found very interesting, and learning about that through you and just in what I understand about kind of how Toyota works, that I think might be also interesting for our listeners as they're thinking about whether a role should be sustained or eliminated or that kind of thing.
Let me clarify a point, I think, in the question you're asking.
Great.
I think that organizations, what I see outside of it, and I've seen a fair number of organizations. Some organizations kind of rely on just an executive team to kind of get together once a year and related to a budget, figure out what they're supposed to do. But there's a fair number of organizations also that have some kind of strategy person or a leader who's in charge of strategy. But primarily that role is, and I don't want to belittle that role, it's an important role. It's kind of to define for the organization, like what is the current market conditions, do a competitive analysis, understand where the organization stands kind of relative to its like current financial situation and its like strategic direction. Yeah. And then it kind of it's left up to a great extent to the kind of leaders to kind of take that forward. My version or what I experienced in Toyota and what I recommend to organizations, and some organizations have found effective, is that's only like the beginning of the process for and it only talks about, if we talk about the PDCA, like the plan, do, check, act of all this, that's really just the planning part.
Part of the planning, yeah.
Where organizations actually kind of stumble most frequently is when they try to take that vision or that plan and do something about it. Because they're going to encounter process issues. They're going to encounter capability issues in the organization. They're going to encounter like conflicts with roles and responsibilities between groups. So having someone as a process owner to help, and well, one other point, that's often left up to like the CEO to figure out. They don't have time for that.
Yeah.
So having a process owner responsible to kind of manage that PDCA process throughout the years and through multiple years is what I did in Toyota, and I think what is really helpful. Now, depending on the side of the organization, I've worked with small companies too. They can dedicate a year to just work on that. So you can, and also I would say once the system gets established over the course of a few years, the individual can have like more than one role. They don't have to only be dedicated to that activity. And the reality was, in my job in Toyota, when I managed the Hoshin process, that wasn't just the only role I had.
Sure.
I had managed other things as well.
Okay. Well, thanks for
that answered your question.
Yeah, I think so. Okay. So, I guess the other thing that maybe you could talk a little bit about, so prior to joining corporate strategy, you mentioned time spent in the overseas planning division in Japan. You mentioned time spent at the TSSC group in North America. Then you went to corporate strategy. And then, as you described, you went back to TSSC in I think at that time in the role of general manager. I know that was the role that you had before you, at the time that you left Toyota. And so presumably, let's say when you returned to TSSC in the role of general manager, you would have then been one of those leaders participating in, I don't know, the updating of the vision or defining the Hoshin objectives at the level of the general manager. So you would have been experiencing Hoshin Kanri kind of from that side of it, not from the inside of the corporate strategy group, as you did for many years. So can you tell us about that, about how you experienced Hoshin Kanri in the role of a functional manager or department manager, in this case, general manager for the TSSC group, and in particular, maybe how you experienced Hoshin Kanri with regard to your own like learning and development. What was it about being a department leader, participating in Hoshin Kanri that was challenging for you, and where you grew as a leader?
Well, when I left corporate strategy and went back to work at TSSC again in 2008.
Okay.
This was obviously right after we were going through the world was going through a financial crisis.
Yeah, right.
The automotive industry struggled significantly. 2 of the 3 big 3 automakers had to be rescued from bankruptcy. And Toyota had its own share of issues. We lost money for the first time in 50 years. And so there was a fair amount of urgency to what the organization should do about that. TSSC existed, and we existed as continuing our original mission of helping outside organizations. And those organizations weren't limited to Toyota companies or Toyota suppliers. That was a part of our mission from the beginning. So there was a fair amount of question that I would say raised in the organization about the validity of TSSC to that date. Would TSSC continue like as is, or should we? There's a lot of knowledge and capability in that organization to help support production capabilities, and should some of that so those resources should be turned and focused more on helping our own facilities where we were, like the rest of the auto industry, where we're struggling. But so that was I seem to kind of stumble into these situations where the organization is going through a major transformation, but TSSC was going through its own kind of major self-reflection on what was an organization we should really do. So along with my boss at the time, Mr. Yokoi, who was the president of TSSC, we put together a proposal on what to do with TSSC. Should it continue as is? And which at the time it was kind of struggling. Should it become absorbed into Toyota, or should it be should it change or modify or reconfirm its mission? And so we decided we would like to revalidate the TSSC mission. TSSC was originally set up to help North America in terms of its manufacturing, but even beyond that, to help for companies to effectively utilize the Toyota production system in their business, in whatever industry you're in. And so we put together a proposal to make TSSC a nonprofit organization, and we took that to Japan. We met with Mr. Cho, who was the founder originally of TSSC back in 1982, and he completely agreed with our proposal, actually. And so
Mr. Cho by then was CEO?
He was the CEO of Toyota globally.
All right.
And, you see, so in a roundabout way, I'm trying to answer your question about Hoshin. So in a way, that became our Hoshin for the next couple of years, was establishing TSSC or I guess say going back to the roots of reestablishing TSSC as a nonprofit organization, helps outside organizations. And we decided to go beyond manufacturing companies, helping healthcare organizations, helping nonprofits, knowing that this methodology would help anywhere, and it did. We worked with, for example, the New York Food Bank, and we reduced the lead time for people to receive meals. People were waiting outside in 20-degree weather to receive a meal. And we were able to reduce that significantly. We didn't have to wait outside anymore. Those are the types of kind of projects that we were able to take on. And just maybe one other point, you might say, well, that's relates to our mission. What about the whole company? Well, the whole company at that time decided to focus on it. Interestingly, our CEO, though we were first time we'd lost money, focused the number one priority on safety for all of North American. For our North American organization. Why he did that is we had a severe accident the year before and he wanted to raise the consciousness of everyone related to safety. So of course, safety was also, we had things at TSSC. We were out in supplier plants. I just mentioned the food bank. We're at all these different organizations. How are we ensuring that we're doing our work safely too? Yeah. That had an impact on us, and it was part of our Hoshin as well.
Well, so that's really interesting. So, especially in your case, having had the level of involvement in Hoshin Kanri that you had in the corporate inside corporate strategy, then to take on the leadership position that you took on for TSSC, and within that group unto itself, but then also in relationship to the broader company, to North America. I mean, what you just described, that like process of kind of reflecting on current performance, the original mission. I mean, it sounds like you very much drew upon the Hoshin Kanri process as you had learned it and been supporting it to do something what sounds pretty innovative for that TSSC organization. So in terms of your own capabilities as a leader, it sounds like that experience in corporate planning, working as kind of in the details with Hoshin Kanri as you had, was very informative, very foundational in then how you led in the role of general manager of TSSC. That's pretty cool. So
can I make a comment about that?
Please. Yeah.
I mean, I had to, I wake up every day and like, and this sounds a little crazy, but pinch myself that I worked in Toyota for as long as I did. I mean, it's like, I recently went back to Japan and met with a gentleman who was my former boss when I was in corporate strategy and is now the CEO of a company called Futaba.
Okay.
And before I even said anything, he said exactly that thing. Because he's no longer inside Toyota. He's kind of supporting a supplier organization. But we both reflected on the level of learning as an individual and not just as an employee, but as a person that I got out of each experience I had with Toyota. And so like over the course of my career, I had multiple experience, like assignments and experiences, of course, but in each stage, I had people that like took responsibility for developing my capability. And I'm going to say, honestly, it was pretty tough at times. It wasn't always just like, Mark, we're going to like develop you and make you into a wonderful employee. And we're going to send you to seminars. There was a fair amount of like tough guidance too. And at the time, some of that was not so easy, but coming out on the other side of it, I mean, I just felt that pretty much every manager I worked for, whatever level in the organization, was kind of looking out for like my development. And I'm not unique. I think if you talk to 100 Toyota people, 99 of them would feel that way.
Well, it sounds like it was both a matter of having mentors investing in you, as you described, but also structurally being put in situations that were by design challenging, right? I mean, just the notion of Hoshin Kanri, as I've learned it from you, and I know as you support organizations, some of LEI's co-learning partners and stuff like that, thinking about those Hoshin objectives, not simply as a matter of what are we going to prioritize this year, but what challenge must we meet? What objective, must we rise to the occasion for in order to, survive, to become more competitive, to respond to the 2008 financial crisis? I mean, each of those things, every one of those objectives really is challenging the organization to go beyond its current capabilities, go into the unknown. And it sounds like that was, that in addition to having the support and the mentorship and everything, that investment from those mentors that in you specifically,
yes,
added up to 23 years of challenge and learning and growth. And
the only thing I would add to that is, to what you just said, is that the final step in that was also how will Mark, in my case, like, how will him taking on this initiative develop his capability? Was a very thoughtful process too. And so I think that was, and the example I gave of the key initiatives earlier and how plant managers were kind of asked to step up and be leaders across the organization. That was I helped design that process, but that was a process led by the their boss, who was the CEO. The CEO worked with each one of those leaders to ensure and was very thoughtful about who should be assigned to what initiative to ensure that the proper development was given. So I think it's an excellent way to develop capability in leadership. If you have the right leaders.
Well, what I find so remarkable about it is not only the thoughtfulness that goes into, kind of who will be assigned to which challenge for their development, but doing that at the same time that the company is saying this challenge is critically important for the organization to overcome. We have to be successful here. This isn't, something that if we're successful, that's great. If we're not successful, no big deal. Like, these are critical challenges for the organization, and to, not only understand that and how important essential it was for the organization to meet those challenges, but to also take the time to think strategically about who will do what, and to be committed to their development through the process. To do both of those things simultaneously and be as thoughtful about both of those things, I just think is quite remarkable.
Well, I think related to that, I mean, I said that sometimes the challenges were tough, and I would say that's kind of the reason the development is so valuable is that you're tackling real business issues, and this is in an industry that's pretty competitive.
Yeah.
So naturally, you're going to tackle some issues that are pretty hard to competitively. How does Toyota get better in certain areas? As you think through that as an executive or a leader in the organization, I mean, some of those things are going to be difficult to tackle.
Yeah.
But I always felt that the organization worked very hard to ensure that leaders had support they needed, that a development opportunities were given, and backed up.
Yeah. So I think that would be a great place for us to wrap up this conversation. But I guess I'd be I want to be sure, I guess, because we've talked a lot about your experience at Toyota, how formative that was with regard to Hoshin Kanri, your own leadership development. For the last 13 years, though, you've been working on behalf of LEI, supporting many leaders, many organizations, again, with Lean generally, but in many cases with Hoshin Kanri specifically. Are there any, maybe a couple of key points that come to mind for you with regard to what you've spoken to some things already. You've spoken to kind of a traditional strategy role that you see in many organizations. You've talked about, some of the challenges inherent in smaller organizations that may be less problematic for larger organizations with more resources, more capital, that kind of a thing. But is there anything else that perhaps we haven't covered today that you'd want to call attention to with regard to leadership development, specifically through Hoshin Kanri, that's really stood out in your work with organizations outside of Toyota over the last 13 years?
Well, while I was in Toyota, I had the unique opportunity to work for TSSC. So I worked with outside companies.
Right. That's right.
And I had to help make transformation. But that was mostly shop floor related. I didn't help organizations do Hoshin Kanri. But then when I left and people learned about my background, they started to find interest and many organizations struggled with the issue of how to define their strategy. And so once they knew I had that experience in Toyota, they would start to ask me. And I realized that that's a fairly challenging thing to tackle. I mean, I worked in Toyota in the environment I just explained over the last hour, where there's a lot of focus on development and there was a fundamentally strong management structure in place. I was often in organizations where that kind of culture and of problem solving and culture of collaboration didn't exist. So I think what there's a lot of things that you'll find in my book that if once it's out, if you get a chance to read it, that I think are valuable. But, I think I would emphasize what's been most impactful for leaders that I've worked with. And I think, and I have multiple examples I could share, but leaders that I've worked with, that they have to kind of step out of their C-suite and they've got to go and learn like what problems are that exist on the front line in the organization, hear from people. And actually, I would say they should go, what's been most like impactful for me in that situation is for the leader, the CEO, and I've done this with CEOs, I've done this with other top leaders, go through a problem solving, A3, or go through a problem solving exercise yourself of really solving a frontline business problem and see how it's easy to say that, the issues exist in middle management, or the issues exist because we can't produce this product, and to do a flyby and go see it, but help try to solve one of those problems and see how difficult it really is. It gives an incredible amount of empathy for leaders to, I think, going forward, to be able to step in those kind of situations and understand how, like, what role different level leaders in the organization have to take to help solve some of those frontline problems, because those are the problems that usually are the biggest. Those kind of problems are the impediments to making progress with strategy.
Well, so in just a week or two, you'll be sitting down with some leaders that have gone through that exact kind of learning. There's a panel that we've organized that you'll moderate at the summit with 4 executives that have done exactly that, committed to their own kind of fundamental learning in the process of taking on these strategic challenges and the learning and growth that will happen sort of at that higher level in the organization as well. So anyway, I look forward to that conversation. And Mark, I really appreciate this conversation for you sharing everything that you've shared. Hopefully for our listeners, there's some maybe interesting ideas or aspects of Hoshin Kanri that we touched upon today that may be new for them with whatever experience they may have had with Hoshin Kanri up until now. So anyway, so thanks for sitting down and having that conversation today. Thanks again for putting in 30 years to write a book. And I know I can speak on behalf of the team at LEI, our board, our staff, our faculty. We're all extremely excited for the book to get out there. We'll start reading it and for us to start engaging with the broader community around these ideas. So thanks for all that work and for sitting down and talking to me today.
Thank you, Josh.
All right.